He was 18 years old, and the only thing he inherited was a boarded-up metal shed in the middle of nowhere. What he discovered inside wasn't just his grandmother's secret. It was a second chance at a life he never knew he'd lost. If you've ever felt like you were starting from absolute zero, with nothing but a backpack and a past you couldn't shake, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button and stick with me, because sometimes the things that look like endings are actually the beginning. The day I turned 18 felt less like a celebration and more like an eviction. For 12 years, the state had been my landlord, my parent, my warden. The last 6 of those were spent at Northgate Youth Services, a place with a name that sounded like a suburban subdivision, but felt like a waiting room for a life that was perpetually delayed. The walls were cinder block painted a color I called institutional beige, a shade meant to soothe you into submission. The floors were linoleum, scuffed with the ghosts of 1,000 restless kids who had paced them before me. My worldly possessions fit into a single black duffel bag. A few changes of clothes, a worn paperback I'd read a dozen times, a toothbrush, and a small framed photo of a woman I barely remembered, my mother. It was the only thing I had from before the system, before my name became a file number. Mr. Henderson, my caseworker for the final 2 years, was waiting for me in the lobby. He was a man who seemed permanently tired, his shoulders slumped under the invisible weight of too much paperwork and not enough hope. He wore the same rotation of 3 rumpled suits, and today was the Navy one, the one he wore for official business. Graduations, court dates, and, apparently, expulsions into adulthood. "Leo," he said, his voice flat. He didn't smile. He wasn't unkind, just professionally detached. It was a survival mechanism in his line of work. I understood that. "Ready to go?" I nodded, the duffel bag strap digging into my shoulder. Ready wasn't the word. There was no ready for this. It was just now. The other kids in the common room watched me, some with envy, some with a flicker of fear for their own turn. I gave a small nod to a kid named Sam, who was 2 years away from his own ejection seat. He just stared back, his eyes wide. "Got your final check?" Henderson asked, gesturing to the envelope in my hand. It contained $753, my starter funds, the accumulated pittance from state allowances and a part-time dishwashing job they'd arranged. It felt like a fortune and nothing at all at once. "Yeah. Okay, I'm driving you to the bus station. But first, we need to stop at the county administration building. There's some paperwork. A final piece of business." This was unexpected. I figured he'd just drop me at the Greyhound terminal and that would be it. A final handshake, a hollow, good luck, and then I'd be another closed case in his filing cabinet. The idea of more paperwork made my stomach tighten. Paperwork had defined my life, forms and signatures that moved me from one home to another, one school to another. Each one a legal document solidifying my status as a ward of the state. "What kind of business?" I asked, my voice betraying a sliver of the anxiety I was trying to hide. "Something from your grandmother's estate," he said, already walking toward the door. I had to hurry to keep up. The words hung in the air, heavy and strange. My grandmother. I had vague, fractured memories of her. A warm kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and damp earth. A rough, calloused hand holding mine. She had died when I was 6, right before everything fell apart. It was her death that triggered the cascade of events leading me here, to this moment. I never knew she had an estate. We weren't people with estates. We were people who lived in rented houses and drove second-hand cars. An estate was for people in movies, for families with names on buildings. The drive to the county building was silent. The city slid by the window, a blur of concrete and glass that had always felt alien to me. I was a resident of this city, but I had never really lived in it. I'd only existed within the designated zones the system had assigned to me. The group home, the school, the occasional supervised outing to a movie theater. The county building was an imposing brick monolith, the kind of place where decisions were made that you never saw, but always felt. Henderson led me through a maze of hallways that all smelled of old paper and floor wax. We ended up in a small, windowless office. A woman with severe glasses and a nameplate that read, Eleanor Vance, probate clerk, sat behind a large metal desk. She didn't look up when we entered. "Leo Vance?" she asked, her eyes fixed on a file in front of her. "That's me," I said. "Wait, Vance? My last name was Sterling." I looked at Henderson, confused. He gave a slight shake of his head, a signal to just go with it. "It's a formality, Leo. Your grandmother's name." The woman finally looked at me over the top of her glasses. Her gaze was as sharp and impersonal as a staple remover. "Your grandmother, Clara Vance, passed away 12 years ago. Her will stipulated that a specific asset was to be held in trust for her sole heir, you, until your 18th birthday. That day is today." She slid a thick manila envelope across the desk. It landed with a soft, definitive thud. My name, Leo Vance, was typed neatly on the front. "What asset?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "A piece of property," she said, her tone suggesting this was all a tedious waste of her time. "Deed is in there. Title is clear. Property taxes have been paid annually from the trust, which is now depleted. All future financial responsibility for the property is yours." I stared at the envelope. A piece of property. My mind raced. A house? A small apartment? The fragments of memory I had of my grandmother were tied to a little bungalow with a sagging porch, but my mom had said it was a rental. Henderson finally spoke up. "The property is located in Stillwater County, Leo. It's rural, about a 4-hour bus ride from here." "What is it?" I asked again, looking from him to the clerk. The woman sighed, as if I were a particularly slow student. "It is officially listed as Lot 7, Block 4 on the county parcel map. It consists of 2.3 acres of land and one structure, a Quonset hut." A Quonset hut. A metal hangar. A big, curved shed. I felt a bizarre urge to laugh. All this formality, this trip to a government building, for a tin can on a patch of dirt. The hope that had flickered to life in my chest just moments before was extinguished, replaced by a familiar, dull disappointment. Of course, it was never going to be a house. It was never going to be a real home. It was always going to be something broken, something strange, something not quite right, just like me. "There's more," Henderson said quietly, placing a second, smaller envelope on top of the first. This one was from a law firm, embossed with a fancy logo. "This came to my office last week. It's an offer to purchase the property." I picked up the smaller envelope. It felt heavy. An offer? Who would want to buy a Quonset hut? "A development group," Henderson explained. "They've been buying up land in that area. They're planning a resort or something. The offer is significant." I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter of intent. My eyes scanned the text, catching phrases like fair market value and expedited closing. And then I saw the number, $150,000. The air left my lungs. It was an impossible sum, a number from a different universe. It was more money than I had ever imagined holding. more than I could probably earn in a decade of washing dishes. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card, an escape hatch from the life of poverty and struggle that was laid out before me. 150,000? I breathed, looking at Henderson. Is this real? He nodded slowly. It's real. They want the land, Leo. The structure on it is irrelevant to them. They'd just tear it down. They've been trying to acquire it for years, but the trust wouldn't allow a sale. Now that you're 18, the decision is yours. The clerk, Ms. Vance, cleared her throat impatiently. Inside the main envelope, you will find the deed, a map to the location, and a key. She pushed a single, old-fashioned brass key across the desk. It was heavy and ornate, nothing like the cheap, modern keys I was used to. I picked it up. It was cold against my skin. My mind was a whirlwind. Sell. That was the obvious answer. Take the money, get an apartment, a car, go to community college, build some kind of life for myself. A normal life. What use did I have for a metal shed 4 hours away in a place I'd never even heard of? It was a burden, a piece of my past I didn't need. The offer is valid for 30 days, Henderson added, his voice gentle now. They're eager. My advice? Take the money, Leo. It's a clean break, a real fresh start. He was right. It was the logical thing to do, the smart thing. Any sane person would sign the papers and never look back. But as I stood there in that sterile, airless office, holding a key to a place I'd never seen and a letter that could change my financial future, I felt a strange pull, a flicker of something. It wasn't logic. It was a whisper from those fragmented memories of a woman with kind hands and a kitchen that smelled like home. She had kept this for me. For 12 years, through all the chaos, she had held on to this one thing for me. A worthless Quonset hut on a patch of dirt. Why? The question was small, but it planted itself in my mind and refused to be dislodged. Before I could take the easy way out, before I could sign my name and walk away, I had to know why. I want to see it first, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. Henderson looked surprised. The clerk looked annoyed. Leo, it's a 4-hour bus ride, Henderson said. There's probably nothing there. Maybe, I said, stuffing the envelopes and the key into my jacket pocket. But it's mine. I have to see it. The bus ride was a journey through a landscape of forgetting. The city's dense grid of concrete and steel slowly gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to the ragged fringe of industrial parks and strip malls. After an hour, even those faded, replaced by wide, open stretches of farmland, punctuated by lonely farmhouses and skeletal trees black against a pale gray sky. The world outside the window grew quieter, emptier. I watched the power lines dip and rise, a hypnotic rhythm marking the miles. I was the only person on the bus under 60. The other passengers were mostly older women with shopping bags or men in work jackets, their faces etched with a kind of weary resignation. They all seemed to know each other, exchanging quiet greetings. I was the anomaly, the kid in the hoodie with a duffel bag and a storm in his eyes. I kept my headphones on, even with no music playing, a universal sign for "leave me alone." My mind kept replaying the scene in the clerk's office. $150,000. The number felt like a ghost haunting me. It was freedom. It was safety. It was everything I'd never had. With that money, I could disappear. I could reinvent myself as someone who wasn't a product of the system. Someone who hadn't spent his teenage years learning how to make himself small and invisible to avoid trouble. Mr. Henderson's advice echoed in my head. Take the money, Leo. It's a clean break. He meant well. He saw the money as a tool, a way for me to build a foundation. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like another transaction. My entire life had been a series of transactions, of being moved and managed by forces beyond my control. Selling this land, this one thing that was mine, without even seeing it, it felt like the final transaction, the selling of a history I didn't even understand. The key in my pocket was a heavy, tangible link to that history. I took it out and turned it over in my palm. It wasn't just a key, it was a question. Why a Quonset hut? Why this specific piece of land? My grandmother could have left me money in the trust, a small amount maybe, but something practical. Instead, she left me this, a problem, an inconvenience, a mystery. I pulled out the map the clerk had given me. It was a simple, hand-drawn diagram on a piece of yellowed paper, probably photocopied a dozen times. A main highway, a turnoff onto a county road, and then a smaller dirt lane marked with a star. Vance Property, it read in neat block letters. The map was tucked inside the deed, a formidable-looking document filled with legal jargon that made my head spin. But one phrase stood out. Clara Vance, for her grandson, Leo. My grandmother's name, my name, linked together on paper. The bus wheezed to a stop in a town called Pine Ridge. It wasn't so much a town as a crossroads with a gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a post office. The driver called out, "Stillwater County Road, next stop." That was my cue. I grabbed my duffel bag and walked to the front. "Can you let me off at Stillwater Road?" The driver, a heavy-set man with a kind face, nodded. "Sure, kid. Not much out there." "I know," I said. A few minutes later, he pulled over at a lonely intersection marked by a rusty green sign. The door hissed open, and I stepped out into a wall of cold, clean air. It smelled of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the city's perpetual exhaust fumes. The bus pulled away, its red taillights shrinking in the distance until they were gone, leaving me in an unnerving silence, broken only by the wind rustling through the tall, dry grass in the ditch. I was completely alone. I checked the map again. My destination was about 2 miles down this road. I adjusted the strap of my duffel bag, pulled my hood up against the biting wind, and started walking. The road was cracked asphalt, crumbling at the edges. On either side, fields stretched out to a horizon that seemed impossibly far away. There were no houses, no signs of life, just the occasional weathered fence and the vast, overwhelming sky. It was beautiful and intimidating. I felt small, an insignificant speck in this huge, empty landscape. This was her world, my grandmother's. It felt nothing like mine. After walking for what felt like an hour, I saw it. Up ahead, set back from the road down a barely there dirt lane, was the unmistakable curved roof of a Quonset hut. It was bigger than I'd imagined, a long, silver-gray arch squatting in a field of overgrown weeds. It looked less like a building and more like a beached whale, something ancient and out of place. My heart started to pound. This was it. This was the inheritance. The dirt lane was more of a suggestion than a road, 2 ruts carved into the earth. As I walked down it, the scale of the place became clearer. The Quonset was massive, at least 60 feet long, and behind it, A line of tall pine trees stood like silent sentinels. The land around it was wild, choked with thorny bushes and tall golden-brown grass that swayed in the wind. No garden, no fence, just untamed nature reclaiming its territory. The front of the hut was a flat wall of corrugated metal, painted a faded, peeling red. A large, sliding, garage-style door dominated the center, and next to it was a smaller, standard-sized door for people. Both were sealed shut. The main door was padlocked, a heavy, rusted chain wrapped around its handles. The smaller door was boarded over with thick planks of wood nailed directly into the metal frame. It wasn't just closed, it was fortified, sealed, as if someone wanted to keep something out, or maybe keep something in. A chill that had nothing to do with the wind snaked down my spine. This wasn't just a forgotten shed. This was a place that had been deliberately locked away. I dropped my duffel bag in the tall grass and walked the perimeter. The metal walls were streaked with rust, bleeding orange tears down to the foundation. The windows, high up on the sides, were thick, frosted glass, caked with years of dirt. I couldn't see anything through them. I went around to the back. It was the same as the front, another boarded-up door. No way in. I came back to the front and looked at the smaller door. The boards were old, the wood weathered gray, but they were thick. I pulled at one, but it was nailed solid. I wasn't getting in that way without a crowbar. Then I looked at the padlock on the main sliding door. It was old and rusted, but it looked formidable. I took out the brass key from my pocket. It looked nothing like a key for a modern padlock. It was too ornate, too old-fashioned. Disappointment washed over me again. Of course, the key was probably for a different lock, one that was long gone. Maybe it was just symbolic. Still, I had to try. I walked up to the huge sliding door and held the key up to the padlock. It was a completely different mechanism. The key wouldn't even fit. I let out a frustrated sigh. So I'd come all this way for nothing. I was locked out of my own inheritance. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Just another door that was closed to me. I was about to give up, to trudge back to the highway and figure out how to get a bus ticket back to a life of couch surfing and uncertainty, when my eyes caught something. To the left of the main door, almost hidden by a thorny bush, was a small, square metal plate set into the wall. It was just a few inches across, also painted red, but the paint was flaking off, revealing dark metal underneath. In the center of it was a keyhole. It wasn't a modern lock. It was a keyhole that matched the old brass key perfectly. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a lock for the door. This was something else entirely. With trembling hands, I inserted the key. It slid in smoothly, a perfect fit. I turned it. There was a loud, grating click, a sound of metal parts moving for the first time in over a decade. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan, a section of the corrugated metal wall next to the main door popped open about an inch. It wasn't a lock. It was a release mechanism. It had opened a hidden panel, a secret door disguised as part of the wall. I wedged my fingers into the gap and pulled. The panel was heavy, but it swung outward on hidden hinges, revealing a dark, narrow opening just wide enough for a person to slip through. A wave of cool, musty air washed over me, the smell of trapped time. It smelled of dust, oil, and something else. Something faintly sweet, like dried flowers. I peered into the darkness. I couldn't see anything. It was like staring into a black hole. The $150,000 whispered in my ear again. Go back. Take the money. This place is not for you. But I couldn't. Not now. I had to know what was inside. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and stepped across the threshold, leaving the gray afternoon light behind and plunging into the belly of the beast. The air inside the Quonset was thick and still, heavy with the silence of years. As my eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom, the vastness of the space began to reveal itself. The only light came from the hidden door I'd left ajar, and the faint, milky glow filtering through the grimy, high windows. Dust motes danced like tiny galaxies in the slivers of light, a silent, swirling cosmos. The curved ceiling arched high above me, lost in shadow, making the place feel like the nave of a strange, metallic cathedral. The floor was concrete, cold and damp under my feet. The space was not empty. It was filled with shapes, shrouded figures draped in white canvas tarps, like sleeping giants. They were arranged in neat rows, creating aisles and pathways through the cavernous interior. It looked like a storage facility, a museum of forgotten things. I walked down the central aisle, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the silence. I reached out and touched one of the tarps. It was stiff with age and dust. I hesitated for a moment, then pulled it back. Underneath was a workbench. It was made of heavy, dark wood, its surface scarred with the marks of countless projects. Vices were bolted to its edges, and above it, on the wall, tools hung in perfect, orderly rows. Wrenches, screwdrivers, hammers, saws, each in its designated spot, outlined in white paint like a crime scene. They were old tools, with wooden handles worn smooth by use. But they were clean and well cared for, gleaming faintly in the dim light. This wasn't a place of neglect. This was a place of purpose, a workshop. I moved to the next shrouded object. It was a large piece of machinery, something with gears and belts. I didn't know what it was, a lathe or a mill of some kind. It was covered in a thin film of oil, protected from the damp air. My grandmother, what was she doing with all this? The image I had of her, a soft woman in a flowery apron, didn't fit with this industrial, masculine space. I continued my exploration, pulling back more tarps. I found shelves filled with labeled coffee cans, containing nuts, bolts, and screws of every imaginable size. Stacks of lumber, neatly organized by dimension. Metalworking supplies, electrical components. It was the most organized space I had ever seen, a stark contrast to the chaotic, transient nature of my own life. Everything here had a place. Everything had a purpose. Towards the back of the hut, the space changed. Instead of workbenches and machinery, there was a small living area sectioned off by makeshift walls. A simple cot with a neatly folded wool blanket, a small wooden table and a single chair, a pot-bellied stove with a stack of firewood beside it, and a wall of bookshelves crammed with books. Not paperbacks, but old, hard-bound volumes on engineering, physics, electronics, and history. It was a monk's cell, a hermit's retreat. Someone had lived here, or at least spent a great deal of time here. On the table sat a single object, a large cedar chest. It was not covered. It was placed deliberately in the center of the table, as if waiting. It was beautifully made, with brass fittings and intricate carvings on the lid. A small, tarnished brass plaque on the front was engraved with a single word, Leo. My name. My breath hitched, My heart, which had been pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement, suddenly felt like it was going to stop. This was it. This was what she had left for me. Not the hut, not the tools, not the land. This chest. I ran my fingers over the engraved letters. It felt real, solid, a direct connection to her, across the gulf of 12 years. The chest was locked, of course. A small built-in lock was set just below the plaque. I fumbled in my pocket for the brass key, but I already knew. It wasn't for this. This lock was smaller, more delicate. I looked around the small living area, my eyes scanning the shelves, the cot, the floor. Where would she hide a key? I checked under the blanket, inside the wood stove, behind the books. Nothing. Frustration began to bubble up again. I was so close. I felt like a character in a bad adventure movie, solving one puzzle only to be faced with another. I sat down in the chair, the wood creaking under my weight, and stared at the chest. I was tired. The long bus ride, the walk, the emotional roller coaster of the day, it was all catching up to me. The easy answer, the $150,000, felt so appealing again. I could just leave this chest here, lock the hut back up, and walk away from this whole confusing mess. But I couldn't. This chest was a message, and I had to read it. My eyes fell on the stack of books on the shelf next to me. They were mostly technical manuals, but one stood out. It was a thick, leather-bound book with no title on the spine. It was a journal. I pulled it from the shelf. The leather was cracked and soft. I opened it. The pages were filled with my grandmother's handwriting. It was a looping, elegant cursive, but it was filled with technical diagrams, mathematical equations, and notes on metal fatigue, stress tolerances. It looked like an engineer's logbook. This was getting stranger and stranger. I flipped through the pages. It was mostly incomprehensible to me. Then, near the back, I found a different kind of entry. The handwriting was the same, but the content was not technical. It was a list: flour, sugar, coffee, engine oil, 10W30, new blade for the bandsaw, birthday present for Leo, age 6. My eyes locked on the last line. I felt a jolt, like a small electric shock. I kept reading. The next few pages were filled with lists like this, interspersed with more technical notes. And then I found it. A single page, dated a few weeks after my 6th birthday. The system failed him. I failed him. There is no other way. I have to protect him, and I have to protect the work. The lockbox is buried. The key is in the usual place. This hut is his future. He just has to be strong enough to claim it. The key is in the usual place. What usual place? I read the line again and again. It was a clue, but a clue for someone who knew her habits, not for me. I put the journal down on the table, my head spinning. What work? Protect me from what? The questions were piling up, each one heavier than the last. I stood up and paced the small space, my mind racing. The usual place. The usual place. What was usual in this highly unusual workshop? I thought about the tools hanging in their perfect outlines. Order, precision. Everything had a place. My gaze swept over the workbench, the shelves of labeled cans, the neat stacks of lumber. And then I saw it. On the wall above the main workbench, among the hanging hammers and wrenches, was the white painted outline of another tool. But the space was empty. The outline was of a small, distinctive T-shaped object. A socket wrench handle, maybe, or something else. Below the empty space, a single word was written in small, neat letters. Constant. Constant. What did that mean? I walked back to the bookshelf and scanned the titles. Most were about engineering, but one shelf was different. It was filled with books on philosophy and poetry. I ran my finger along the spines. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, Walden by Thoreau, and a thin volume of poetry by a poet I'd never heard of. The title of the book was The Only Constant. My fingers trembled as I pulled the book from the shelf. It felt lighter than it should have. I opened the cover. The inside of the book had been hollowed out, a perfect rectangular cavity carved into the pages. And nestled inside, on a bed of red velvet, was a small, delicate silver key. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It felt like I'd just solved the world's most elaborate puzzle. I took the key back to the table and stood over the cedar chest. This was the moment of truth. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft, satisfying click. I lifted the heavy lid. The inside of the chest was lined with the same red velvet as the hollowed-out book. It was filled with objects, each one nestled in its own compartment. On the top layer was a stack of yellowed photographs, held together with a ribbon. I picked them up. The first photo was of my grandmother, Clara. She was younger than I remembered, probably in her late 30s. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing work coveralls and safety glasses, standing proudly in front of a gleaming, experimental-looking aircraft. She was smiling, her eyes bright with intelligence and confidence. This was not the folksy, gentle grandmother of my fragmented memories. This was a different woman entirely, an engineer, a builder. The next photo was of her with a man I didn't recognize. He had his arm around her. They were standing in front of the Quonset hut, but it was new then, the metal shining in the sun. They both looked happy. The photo after that made my blood run cold. It was my mother. She was a teenager, maybe 16, standing with the same man from the previous photo, my father. She wasn't smiling. She looked scared, her eyes wide and haunted. And in the background, out of focus, were two other men in dark suits, watching them. Beneath the photos was a thick stack of letters, tied with the same ribbon. And on top of the letters was a single, sealed envelope. In my grandmother's familiar cursive, it said, "For Leo, when you are ready." I was here. I was 18. I had found the key. If this wasn't ready, I didn't know what was. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely break the seal. I unfolded the letter. It was several pages long, front and back. I took a deep breath and began to read. My dearest Leo, if you are reading this, it means you are 18. It means you found the hut, and you were clever enough to find the key. I always knew you were clever, and it means I am long gone. I am sorry for that. I am sorry for so many things. Most of all, I am sorry I couldn't be there to watch you grow up. There are things you need to know, truths I have kept hidden to protect you. The story you were told about your life, about me, about your mother, it was a lie. A necessary one, I hope. I'm going to tell you the real story now. It isn't easy to write, and it won't be easy to read. But you deserve the truth. You are a man now, and you are strong enough to carry it. I was not just your grandmother, Leo. I was an aerospace engineer, a damn good one. In the 70s and 80s, I worked for a private research firm, designing experimental flight systems. That's where I met your grandfather. He was a brilliant test pilot. We built this Quonset together, with our own hands. It wasn't just a workshop, it was our laboratory, our sanctuary. We were working on something revolutionary, a new kind of propulsion system. We believed it could change the world. But our work attracted the wrong kind of attention, not from the government, but from a powerful criminal syndicate. They specialized in industrial espionage, stealing technology and selling it to the highest bidder. They tried to recruit us. When we refused, they tried to threaten us. Your grandfather, he was a brave man. He stood up to them, and they killed him for it. They made it look like a training accident. I was devastated. I wanted to quit, to burn all my research and disappear. But I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let his death be for nothing. So I continued the work, in secret, here in this hut. I raised your mother on my own. I tried to give her a normal life, to keep her away from all of this. But the world I was a part of had a long shadow. Your mother, Lily, was a beautiful, bright, and rebellious girl. When she was 17, she fell in love. His name was Michael Sterling. He was charming and handsome, and he seemed to adore her. I didn't trust him. He was too smooth, too curious about the work I did in the old hut. I tried to warn her, but she was in love. She wouldn't listen. A year later, you were born. It turned out my instincts were right. Michael wasn't a random boy she met. He was sent by the same people who had killed your grandfather. He was their agent, tasked with getting close to my family, with finding a way to get my research. Your mother found out the truth shortly after you were born. She was heartbroken, terrified. She confronted him, and he admitted everything. He told her they would never stop. They would use her, and they would use you, to get to me. This is the hardest part to write, Leo. Your mother made a choice, a terrible, brave, and selfless choice. To protect you, she had to disappear. And to protect me, she had to discredit me. She and Michael staged a scene. They made it look like she was an unfit mother, caught up in his world of petty crime. They made it look like I was a negligent, crazy old woman, unable to care for a child. They sacrificed their names, their reputations, their lives, so that you would be taken away by the state. They believed the system, for all its flaws, was the one place the syndicate couldn't reach you. A ward of the state is a ghost. No connections, no leverage. The day they took you, it broke me in a way your grandfather's death never did. I played my part. I let them think I was incompetent. It was the only way to make sure you were truly safe. Your mother and Michael vanished. I don't know where they went. I pray they found some peace. I never saw her again. After you were gone, I threw myself into my work with a fury. I finished it. The propulsion system, the prototypes. It's all here, Leo, hidden, but I never sold it. I never published it. I couldn't. It was born of too much pain, and I knew that in the wrong hands, it could be used for terrible things. So I locked it all away. I set up the trust to pay the taxes on this land, to keep it waiting for you. And now we come to today. That development company that wants to buy this land, it's a front. It's them, the same syndicate. They never gave up. They've been waiting, patiently, for the trust to run out, for the property to fall into the hands of an 18-year-old kid who they assume is ignorant and desperate for cash. They think you'll take their money without a second thought. They think you'll sell them the land, and they will finally get to tear this place apart and find what they've been looking for all these years. So you have a choice, my dear boy, a choice I never wanted you to have to make. You can take their money. It's a lot of money, enough to start a new life, far away from all this. No one would blame you. You could walk away and be free. In a way, it's what your mother wanted for you, a normal life, untouched by this dangerous legacy. Or you can stay. You can claim this place. Not just the land, but the legacy, the work. Everything I built, everything I saved is hidden here. In the walls, under the floor. In that chest, you will find my final schematics, my patents, and something else, evidence. Proof of what they did to your grandfather. Proof of who they are. Enough to expose them, to bring them down, but it would put you in immense danger. I have also left you something more practical. I was not a fool, Leo. I knew you would need more than just a moral dilemma. Look under the floorboards beneath the cot. There is a lockbox there. It contains all the cash I saved over the years. It's not a fortune, but it's enough. Enough to live on for a year or two. Enough to fix this place up. Enough to give you a real choice, not one made out of desperation. The choice is yours. The easy path to safety and wealth, or the hard path to truth and justice. I don't know which is right. I only know that I wanted you to have the choice. Whatever you decide, know this. I have loved you every single day. Every wrench I turned, every calculation I made, it was all for you. You are not a ward of the state, Leo. You are the grandson of a brilliant pilot and a stubborn engineer. You are the son of a woman who loved you enough to let you go. This Quonset hut is not an inheritance of property. It is an inheritance of purpose. What you do with it is up to you. All my love, forever, Grandma Clara. I finished the letter, and the pages slipped from my fingers, scattering on the dusty floor. The silence of the hut rushed back in, but it was different now. It was filled with ghosts. The ghost of my grandfather, the test pilot. The ghost of my mother, the scared teenager. The ghost of my grandmother, the lonely genius. My own life, which I had always seen as a series of random, unfortunate events, suddenly snapped into focus. It wasn't random. It was a plan. A desperate, tragic, and heroic plan. My time in the system, the loneliness, the feeling of being nobody. It hadn't been an abandonment. It had been a shield, a protection. I started to cry. Not quiet, self-pitying tears, but huge, racking sobs that tore through my body. I cried for the grandmother I never got to know, the brilliant, tough woman who had lived and died in this metal shell. I cried for my mother, who had performed the ultimate act of love by giving me up. I cried for the father I never knew, a man who was both a villain and a victim. And I cried for the 6-year-old boy who thought he'd been thrown away, who had carried that wound for 12 years. The grief was a physical force, doubling me over in the small wooden chair. It was a storm that had been building inside me my whole life, and her letter had finally broken the dam. When the sobs subsided, I was left feeling hollowed out, empty, and strangely calm. The storm had passed. For the first time, I felt a sense of connection, of belonging. I wasn't just Leo Sterling, the kid from the group home. I was Leo Vance. My roots weren't in foster homes and state-run facilities. They were right here in the concrete floor of this Quonset hut. The choice she laid out for me was stark: the money or the truth, safety or justice. I thought about the $150,000. It was still a staggering amount of money. It was the sensible choice. It was the escape I had always dreamed of. But now, the money felt dirty. It was blood money. It was their final victory, the confirmation that their tactics had worked, that they could buy their way out of anything, that a scared kid would always choose cash over conviction. Taking it would mean my family's sacrifices were for nothing. My mother's disappearance, my grandmother's lonely vigil, my grandfather's death. It would all be reduced to a simple real estate transaction. And what would I do with the money? Get an apartment in a city that felt alien to me? Go to college and learn about a world that felt meaningless compared to the story I now held in my hands? The normal life that had seemed so appealing just hours ago now felt like a pale, flimsy substitute for the real, substantial legacy that was buried in this room. This is a good time to pause and speak to you directly. If you've ever been faced with a choice that felt like it defined who you are, the easy road versus the hard one, I want you to know you're not alone. So many of us are handed a script for our lives, and the bravest thing we can do is decide to write our own. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever had to dig through the past to find your future, let me know in the comments. Your stories matter. This community is for people who get it, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. We're in this together. Now, let's get back to what I decided. I looked around the hut, at the tools hanging on the wall, at the books on the shelves, at the cedar chest on the table. This place wasn't a burden. It was an arsenal. It was a library. It was a fortress. It was a home I had to earn. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. It was a calling. My grandmother's letter had mentioned a lockbox. I got down on my hands and knees and felt under the cot. My fingers brushed against a loose floorboard. Using the tip of a screwdriver from the workbench, I pried it up. And there it was, a small, heavy metal box. It was unlocked. I lifted the lid. It was full of cash. Bundles of 20s, 50s, and 100s, held together with rubber bands. It was old money, the bills soft and worn. I didn't count it, but my grandmother was right. It was enough to start. I stood up, the lockbox in my hands. The weight of it was grounding. This wasn't a dream. This was real. I knew what I had to do. First, I went back to the cedar chest. Beneath the letters, I found the other items my grandmother had mentioned. A series of detailed schematics, rolled up and tied with string. They were beautiful, hand-drawn blueprints filled with her elegant script. I found a thick file folder containing documents, patents filed under a pseudonym, sworn affidavits she had collected over the years, copies of newspaper articles about my grandfather's accident, with her own annotations in the margins pointing out inconsistencies. It was her case against them, her life's other great project. I carefully placed everything back in the chest except for one thing, a small, sturdy flip phone from the bottom of the lockbox. It was an old-school burner phone. A note attached to it said, "Fully charged, one number programmed in. Use it if you choose to fight. His name is Ben Carter. He was your grandfather's lawyer and oldest friend. He has been waiting for this call for a very long time. Trust him." The final piece of the puzzle, my first ally. My decision was made. There was no fear anymore. Just a cold, clear sense of purpose. I wasn't a scared kid anymore. I was my grandmother's grandson. I walked back to the hidden door, the cash box under one arm, and stepped out into the late afternoon light. The world looked different. The sky seemed sharper, the colors of the wild grass more vibrant. The wind no longer felt biting. It felt bracing, alive. I walked the 2 miles back to the highway, my body light with a newfound energy. I stood at the crossroads, waiting. After about 20 minutes, a pickup truck rattled to a stop. An old farmer with a weathered face and kind eyes leaned across the passenger seat. "Need a lift into town, son?" "Yes, sir, I do," I said, hopping in. In Pine Ridge, I used a 20 from the box to buy a feast at the diner, a cheeseburger, fries, a milkshake. It was the best meal of my life. I bought a few supplies at the gas station market, a powerful flashlight, work gloves, bottled water, and a crowbar. Then I called a taxi from the payphone, the only one in town, to take me back to the property. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the fields, I stood before the Quonset hut once more. This time, I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt like I was coming home. I spent the next hour working with the crowbar on the boards covering the small man door. The nails screeched in protest as I pried them loose, the sound echoing in the twilight. Finally, the last board came free. Behind it was a heavy steel door. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. My grandmother had sealed the place from the outside, but left it accessible from the inside. She had planned for my return. I swung the door open and stepped inside. Using my new flashlight, I found a generator in a corner and a can of fuel. Following the instructions in her journal, which I had brought with me, I got it running. With a sputter and a roar, the generator coughed to life. I found the main breaker box and flipped the switches. One by one, fluorescent lights flickered on, humming and buzzing, flooding the cavernous space with a stark, clean light. The sleeping giants were revealed in all their detail. The workbenches, the machinery, the shelves, it was all there, a kingdom in waiting. For the first time, I saw the full extent of my inheritance. It was magnificent. The first week was a blur of labor. I was driven by a manic energy, a need to make the space my own. I started by cleaning. I swept away 12 years of dust and grime. I washed the filthy windows, letting in the clear country sunlight for the first time in over a decade. I organized the tools, polished the workbenches, and aired out the small living quarters. With every layer of dust I removed, I felt like I was also clearing away the dust from my own life, revealing something solid and true underneath. During the day, I worked on the hut. At night, I sat at the small wooden table and read. I read my grandmother's journals, not just the technical entries, but her personal ones too. I learned about her hopes, her fears, her grief. I read the letters in the chest, letters from her to my grandfather before he died, filled with love and inside jokes. I studied the photographs, memorizing the faces of the family I never knew. I was piecing together my own history, one page, one photo at a time. I learned to live in the silence. It was no longer unnerving. It was peaceful. I learned the rhythm of the country, the way the light changed throughout the day, the sound of the wind in the pines, the cry of a hawk circling overhead. I was becoming part of the landscape. One afternoon, a dusty pickup truck I recognized from the road pulled down my lane. It was the old farmer who had given me a lift. He got out, a man probably in his 70s, wearing overalls and a cap. "Saw the lights on," he said, his voice a low rumble. He looked at the now unboarded door and the clean windows. "Figured someone was finally home." "Just me," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Name's Gus," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Live just down the road. Knew your grandmother, Clara, a fine woman, stubborn as a mule but sharp as a tack." I shook his hand. It was like shaking a bundle of hardwood. "Leo." "Her grandson," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. It wasn't a question. "You look like her. Got the same determined set to your jaw." He looked around, a sad smile on his face. "We all wondered what would become of this place. She poured her whole life into it. Glad to see it's in family hands." We talked for a while. He told me stories about Clara, about how she'd show up at his farm looking for a specific part for one of her contraptions, or how the whole town buzzed with rumors about the strange noises and lights coming from the Vance workshop at all hours of the night. He didn't ask what I was doing here or what my plans were. He just accepted it. "If you need anything," he said as he was leaving, "a hand with something heavy, a ride to town, you just come on by. A neighbor's a neighbor." It was a simple offer, but it meant the world to me. It was the first time in my life anyone had called me a neighbor. That night, I knew it was time. The 30-day deadline on the developer's offer was approaching. I took out the burner phone. My hand was steady as I turned it on and found the single programmed number. I pressed call. It rang twice. A calm, measured voice answered. "Hello? Is this Ben Carter?" I asked. There was a pause. "Yes, it is. To whom am I speaking?" "My name is Leo Vance. My grandmother was Clara Vance. She left me a phone." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I could hear the man's sharp intake of breath. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "Leo, my God, I've been waiting for this call for 12 years. The dam of my carefully constructed composure broke. For the first time, I wasn't a ward of the state, an heir, or a fighter. I was just a kid who had found his way home and was talking to the only living person who knew the whole story. I told him everything. About leaving the group home, about the will, about finding the hut and the letter and the chest. I told him about the developer's offer. He listened patiently, without interruption. When I was finished, he said, "Clara was a remarkable woman. She planned for everything. Leo, you've done the hardest part. You found the truth, and you made your choice. Now, you don't have to be alone in this fight." The next day, a black sedan I didn't recognize pulled up. A man in a sharp suit got out. He looked like he belonged on Wall Street, not a dirt lane in Stillwater County. He had a briefcase in his hand. For a terrifying second, I thought it was them. He walked up to me, a confident smile on his face. "Leo Vance? My name is Daniel Porter. I represent the North Ridge Development Group. I'm here to finalize our generous offer for your property." I stood my ground, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it, the first real confrontation. "The offer is declined," I said. My voice didn't shake. His smile faltered. "I don't think you understand. $150,000 is a life-changing amount of money for a young man in your position." The way he said position was laced with condescension. He saw me exactly as they'd planned, a desperate kid who could be bought. "I understand perfectly," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "This land isn't for sale, not for any price." He stared at me, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance, and then to a flicker of something else. Calculation. He was reassessing. This wasn't going according to his script. "That's a mistake, son," he said, his voice turning cold. "A very big mistake. This offer won't be on the table forever, and this part of the country can be a lonely place." It was a veiled threat, clear as day. "I'm not lonely," I said, "and I'm not selling. You can tell your bosses that Clara Vance's work is safe, and so is her grandson." I saw a flash of genuine shock in his eyes when I said her name. He hadn't expected me to know anything. He recovered quickly, adjusting his tie. "You'll regret this," he muttered, before turning on his heel and stalking back to his car. I watched him drive away, a cloud of dust in his wake. I had won the first battle, but I knew the war was just beginning. That evening I called Ben Carter again and told him what happened. "Good," he said. "You drew them out. Now it's our turn to make a move. The evidence your grandmother collected, it's powerful, Leo. But we need to be smart. They are dangerous people." Over the next few months, a new life took shape. Ben became my mentor, my general. We spoke every day. He guided me through the legal maze, helping me formally establish my ownership of the land and file injunctions that would tie up any of the development company's attempts at a hostile takeover in court for years. We began the slow, careful process of leaking some of Clara's evidence to trusted journalists Ben knew, building a public case against the syndicate without revealing our full hand. I wasn't just a caretaker anymore. I was a student. I spent my nights devouring my grandmother's books, teaching myself the basics of engineering and physics. During the day, I began to work not just on the hut, but with the tools inside it. I started with simple projects, repairing a broken fence for Gus, building new shelves. My hands, once soft and useless, became calloused and capable. I was learning my grandmother's language, the language of making, of building. The Quonset was no longer just a shelter. It was a classroom. I never did uncover the revolutionary propulsion system. That was a fight for another day, a legacy too large to tackle all at once. For now, my fight was simpler: to protect this place, to honor the sacrifices that had been made for me. One crisp autumn evening, about a year after I first arrived, I stood outside the hut and looked up at the star-filled sky. The air was cold and clean. The lights of the workshop glowed warmly behind me. I was no longer the lost boy who had stepped off that bus. I was a young man with a home, a purpose, and a future I was building with my own two hands. My grandmother had left me a choice between an easy, empty life and a hard, meaningful one. I had chosen the hard path, and it had turned out to be the greatest gift of all. It had led me here, to this small patch of earth under a vast sky, to a place where I finally belonged. The road ahead was uncertain and filled with risk, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. This story isn't just about a Quonset hut or a hidden inheritance. It's about the fact that our past doesn't have to be a prison. Sometimes, the things that were meant to protect us look like abandonment. Sometimes, the truth is buried under years of pain and lies. But if we're brave enough to dig, if we're strong enough to face what we find, we can uncover not just a history, but a future. We can find our own inheritance of purpose. Have you ever had to redefine what home means to you? Have you ever found strength in a story you thought was about weakness? Share your journey in the comments below. I read every single one, because in this community, no one's story is insignificant. Your voice matters. Thank you for listening, and if you believe in the power of second chances, hit that subscribe button, and let's continue this journey together.